that time of year, but I'm glad it's warming up instead of getting cooler.
Me too.
Hey, partners, I have noon. I don't know about you all, but how about we get started and stay on track? Welcome, everyone. My name is Sandy Ratliff. I'm with Virginia Community Capital, and we're happy to partner with the Southwest Virginia Small Business Development Center's UVA College of Wise Office of Economic Development and Aegis IT Solutions to produce these bi-weekly sessions focused on technology. Before I turn it over to our co-host today, I just want to give some housekeeping things. This session is being recorded for education and training purposes. It will be available on Virginia Community Capital's Facebook and YouTube channels, and it's also will be available on the Small Business Development Center Network's page. So thanks for joining us, and I'm happy to have Courtney Connor with UVA's College at Wise to be our host today. So Courtney, it's all yours.
Thank you, Sandy. Good afternoon. I'm Courtney Connor Stringer, and I'm the Director of Community and Business Development for UVA Wise, and we're so glad to have you all with us today for disaster recovery and business continuity on-site and off-site setup. So we have Jonathan Evenden with us today, and he is the president and founder of Aegis IT, located in Kingsport, Tennessee. He's been with us many weeks, so if you are rejoining us for a session, I'm sure you've got to hear how great he is and how knowledgeable he is. He's been in IT industry full-time since 2004 and started Aegis IT in 2012. In the rare moments he's not in front of the computer, he loves playing board games and watching Netflix with his wife and son. So without further ado, I will turn it over to you, Jonathan, and we will answer questions at the very end.
Excellent. Give me one second. I've got the slides up here. Yeah, share that. All right, there we go. Welcome, everybody. This is the 8th talk in the series, Disaster Recovery and Business Continuity On-Site Setup versus Off-Site Setup. When we were originally talking about the series, I think I had in mind an on-site set of servers versus off-site with cloud hosting. So because we've already covered that quite a bit on some of the previous talks, I'm going to focus on the broader picture of disaster recovery and business continuity because, one, we haven't covered it at all. Two, it's a huge gap in a number of planning and documentation that when we deal with clients. So it's an extremely important topic. There will be a heavy focus on IT because, of course, we're talking about IT, but I'm going to talk about disaster recovery and business continuity as a broader topic, as well as focusing on on-site versus off-site backups and some of the planning and preparation. So we're going to really focus on planning and preparation and how to set up a disaster recovery and business continuity plan for your business, because I can guarantee you walk into 95% of the business around here and you ask them, can you show me your disaster recovery and business continuity plan? And they're going to look at you like you have 3 heads, because people just don't do that around here. Even businesses that are good size and probably should do that more. So I really want to encourage that. And I've got some resources and some links to help you set up a plan for yourself. So first of all, by way of introduction, I've been fixing computers since the 90s. Absolutely love them. It's just something I've done for a long time. It's a passion. It's a hobby. I do it in my free time when I'm not working. So, there's a blend between work and fun. Been in enterprise IT since 2005. I've been in consulting since 2006 and started Aegis IT actually 9 years ago. So it was May of 2012. So we're extremely thankful to be in business that long. That beats the numbers. Aegis IT, we provide hardware and software support. We do manage IT services. This includes patch management, antivirus, remote support, and any number of features that are critical for businesses. And then most importantly, we do a significant amount of disaster recovery and prevention work and planning for our clients. Backups are a huge portion of that plan, but it's not the only thing that factors into disaster recovery and prevention. So let's talk about overview. So when it comes to DR and BC, which is how I'm going to be referring to disaster recovery and business continuity, just so I don't have to say it 500 times during this talk, The two critical factors that basically dictate your DR and BC planning is what disasters do you want to prevent or recover from? Meaning when you formulate a plan, when you put systems in place to help you recover from a disaster, what specifically do you want to address? Are they going to be small ones, such as potentially the internet going down, meaning your staff don't have access to, say, email, or if you have a hosted phone system, maybe your phones have gone down because the internet is out, or if you have hard drive failure of a server, and now suddenly you can't get into QuickBooks, you can't get access to your critical files, you can't send out quotes to clients because some system is down. That is still a disaster that you'd want to prevent. That's a disaster that you might need to recover from, but that's not as catastrophic as, say, a burned down office. A burned down office is going to be substantially more catastrophic than the internet going down for 30 minutes. You might have an area-wide tornado, which happened here about 6 months before I moved here, 2011, I want to say, is when spring of 2011, when that huge tornado came through and ripped up a bunch of businesses in this area. You have ransomware. Maybe you've seen in the news about how we have no gas at the gas stations because of a ransomware attack hitting a pipeline. That's topical, that's pertinent, and that's happening right now. That's a pretty catastrophic failure. That's a disaster that had to be recovered from. And we've seen what happens when there's no business continuity because the pipeline just got shut down for multiple days. And then additionally, what is your budget for that prevention or recovery? You could have elaborate systems to prevent every conceivable disaster that could hit, but how much is that going to cost you? And will the cost of that prevention outweigh the potential loss, and how realistic that is going to occur? Are you paying, for example, for standby equipment and spare servers? Are you paying for a spare office? Are you paying for a second site that just sits there not being used? Can you buy a whole second building to use just in case something happens to your primary? That all factors into the budget and how much you want to allocate towards disaster recovery and business continuity. And there are certainly organizations that will pay for that. You've got a large company like Amazon. They have multiple data centers in the US. They have multiple data centers in other countries. They've got smaller data centers that aren't full-sized. Yes, you'll notice if an Amazon data center goes down, but it's not as if everything comes to a permanent halt. There are some famous outages of, say, Gmail and Amazon, and important services will go down, but they come back up. They eventually come back up because they have other data centers and other servers that are set up and ready for that in case that occurs. They also spend insane amounts of money to get to that point, and that's probably going to be out of reach for a lot of small businesses. Unless you're the size of an Amazon or a Facebook or a Google, you're going to have a hard time being able to pay for that extensive of an infrastructure all across the world just for disaster recovery purposes. So for your DR and BC, starts with identifying a list of threats that you wish to account for in your plan. And the most important thing I can say is have this written down. If you don't have it written down, you do not have a plan. And there are, I have a link later here on the slide that will take you to a website where you can have a free template for typing up a DR plan, which is extremely helpful. And once again, almost no one around here that we've encountered or worked with or done sales with or, interacted with in any meaningful way has these. It's extremely rare. Ideally, this list would be a range of important problems. So it could be technical, it could be non-technical. It could be a small impact, it could be a large impact. You could have also, or you also should categorize these threats by the size of the threat and the size of the impact. So for example, if your internet goes down for the whole office, that's going to have a large impact, but unless someone has taken out the pole, unless someone has caused physical damage, the overall threat is not huge. If you're going to get your internet back up eventually, and it's not like, for most of us, if your internet goes down, people are going to die. Whereas if your building catches on fire, there's a pretty good chance that physical harm could happen to employees or clients or guests or anyone else that's in the building. So there's a much higher threat level and the size of the impact. This is a free template. We have used this for ourselves internally. It does take time to do this well, and it does take time to do this thoroughly. So don't expect to be able to spend 10, 15 minutes and now you've got a comprehensive DR plan. I would suggest that if you're not spending several hours on this at a minimum, you do not have a comprehensive plan, and you've not spent the time to go through and figure out what you need to account for and how you're going to react and plan for these different disasters. So this plan will cover both technical and non-technical. It'll cover what do you do in the case of a tornado? What do you do in case of a flood? What do you do in case of ransomware? And those are all factors that you really should address. So I've got this in the slide. You can always go back and find that later. All right, so let's talk about some categories. When we talk about categories, we consider what is the impact type, namely low, medium, and high. And yes, there is some overlap, but the idea is that you want to be able to have some category to work from. So low impact would be a minor annoyance to a small work stoppage. This could be a computer crashes. A single computer crashing, it's not going to affect anybody beyond that one person. That's a pretty low impact. Even if it's somebody that's in a mission critical role, that's still probably going to be a pretty low impact. Now, if it's the only computer that has, say, QuickBooks installed, and now suddenly you can't invoice your clients or generate quotes, well, then that's a higher impact, and you probably need to reassess your situation in that case. A medium impact would be something above a small work stoppage to something less than a total work stoppage. And of course, a high impact is the total business is stopped, or you basically have a direct threat to the existence of the business itself. So for example, the pipeline with the ransomware, where you have the entire thing shut down for multiple days, that's a very high impact. The whole business has stopped. That gas did not flow. And it has directly impacted, well, no, that's actually more of a reach. So that it has a very high impact on the business itself, as well as the number of people. So then we also talk about what is the reach. You have low, medium, and high, same concept. Low reach would be maybe a handful of people. Typically, it's going to be a single individual. Let's say someone forgot their password and they can't log in. That's affecting that one person. You have your computer crash because you did something or the hard drive went out. That's going to affect just that one person. That's going to be low impact. Medium impact is somewhere between more than a few people, but less the entire business. And then, of course, reach. High reach is the entire business. So this turns into a grid, which I will have on the next slide. So then you basically look at something and say, we have low impact, low reach, all the way up to the worst, which is high impact, high reach. So this basically makes a low impact, low reach issue the least concerning, and it's still worthwhile to address those in your DR plan. It also means that the high impact, high reach issues are the most concerning. Now, the reason why you would want to have a range is because you're basically more likely to have a computer crash than you are to have a fire start in your office. I would hope. Maybe you're in an environment where a fire is a much higher risk. If so, you're probably not safe to operate in that space. That would be of great concern if you've got a higher risk of losing your office to fire than you do from your computer crashing. So ideally, a high impact, high reach issue is also something that is extremely rare. For example, that tornado that ripped through the area, that was 10 years ago. We haven't had anything like that since. And I don't know when it was that something like that had occurred previously. It's a rare event. Now, that being said, it was high impact and high reach because of how many businesses were affected, how many people were affected. There was work stoppage all over the place. There was insurance claims all over the place. It was a huge mess. But it also was 10 years ago, and it hasn't happened since. So there's sort of that grid becomes helpful to assess and address how we can plan for these issues. So you've got this grid: low impact, low reach, low impact, medium reach, low impact, high reach. And so ideally, you will want to address all of these in your DR plan. ideally. Low impact, low reach would be something that would happen more frequently than high impact, high reach. But I can't say that for sure, and I would not know that without looking at your business in particular. So how do we take this and work with this? So we take this by saying we're going to review your DR procedures, and we're going to have a list of possible disaster categories prepared. So for example, you're going to have a technical disaster. That could be a ransomware, that could be a hard drive failure, that could be internet failure, that could be a virus. If you get with the gas issue, it wasn't actually ransomware on the pipeline equipment itself. It was a ransomware attack on the billing system. And so because they didn't know how to bill clients for the gas, they shut down the whole thing. That's different than, say, when the Iranian nuke facility was attacked, where they went after the machines themselves, the centrifuges themselves, and they directly attacked the centrifuges themselves. So these would be technical disasters that you want to prevent and be able to recover from. You also have what I like to call employee disasters. Maybe you have a hostile former employee that is going around saying bad things about you on the internet. We've had that happen to clients. Maybe you have a key person that leaves and goes to one of your competitors, and they take all your clients with them. That's something that you need to prepare for. And there are ways to at least provide yourself with legal recourse before that occurs. Maybe you have an employee that locks you out of key resources. There was a situation, was it 10 years ago? It might have been longer at this point, where an IT, I think it was it was a network engineer. A network engineer that worked for the city of San Francisco was in the process of getting terminated. And right before he left, he changed the passwords on all the critical pieces of equipment in the organization for the city of San Francisco. This includes firewalls, switches, basically anything network related. He changed all the passwords on them and refused to hand them over. So he locked the city of San Francisco out of their equipment. And it turned into him getting arrested, and he got sued, and it was a huge mess. But what ended up happening is the city of San Francisco was never able to get the passwords from him. They had to pay someone to come in and reset all the passwords on every single device on the network, which was expensive and costly. And in that particular case, if they had a failure, then you don't have the passwords to get in there and fix something. You can't make any changes. You are locked out of your equipment, and that could be a serious problem, especially if devices fail or you need to make any changes. So that's very much an employee disaster that you can at least have some precautions in there for in your plan. You have some environmental disasters. That would be your floods, fire, earthquakes, hail. All the 3 out of the 4 have occurred here. I know that I've had a client that lost equipment to flood, had another client that lost equipment to fire. I've been through 2 earthquakes myself out in Southern California, and I know that right before we moved here, there was that storm that caused a whole bunch of hail damage, and the person that I was working for at the time, he had several trucks that got damaged by hail, and once again, it was a mess because of how much damage that had occurred. That's all environmental disasters. You can at least have some sort of attempt to plan for them. And we'll talk. I have some examples to include in your disaster recovery plan, and we'll talk about flooding and fire, for example. You have some societal. I guess this is more timely. You've got a situation where there are riots. You've got COVID. Rioting hopefully is pretty infrequent. We've had situations where, like was it Maryland and St. Louis, where riots take over and do billions of dollars worth of damage, and businesses are destroyed and set on fire, and inventory is stolen. That's basically a bunch of people getting together and rioting. That's some societal issues. Even COVID, I would almost put societal, because if you're just an individual by yourself, well, then COVID's not a huge deal. It's when you start getting people together that COVID becomes more of a problem. You also have financial disasters. Maybe you have stolen funds. Maybe an employee was embezzling funds. Maybe you were subject to a scam. Click here to get your money from my Nigerian account, or click here to see this FedEx link that we sent you because, you missed your package. Actually, just had a client that opened up a FedEx receipt that wasn't from FedEx, and there's a virus on the computer, which we've since cleaned up. You also have product theft. That's very much a financial issue because now you got to pay to replace that product. Once again, these are all categories that will fit into that quadrant, that 3x3 quadrant, in terms of impact and reach. So let's give some examples, and these are some things that would go directly into your DR plan. They're not extensive. Ideally, when you write this out or plan this out, it would be more comprehensive. This is just strictly for examples, and this is just to give you a taste of what it should look like. So let's say an office catches fire, total loss of equipment. This did happen to a client. He had about $100,000 worth of equipment in a shed that caught on fire. It was someone doing yard work. So you're talking lawnmowers, you're talking expensive 0-turn lawnmowers, you're talking mulch, shovels, everything, and it was part of the issue was that other people were storing other items in that shed as well. So it wasn't just his equipment that burned down, but other people's equipment as well. So in that particular case, you've now lost your critical equipment to be able to perform your job, because if your lawnmowers are dead, now you've got to go buy new ones. You're not able to cut your yards and fulfill your contracts. So that's a pretty significant problem. So in this case, if your office catches fire, you're talking high impact and high reach, especially if your servers are in there and if your line of business software is in there. This is an office catching fire is something that is going to impact everybody in the business, and it's going to affect everyone in the business. So that's why I say it's high reach, high impact. So what would you do to prepare for this? For example, you would have in your plan that you're going to be doing mandatory fire inspections. You're going to be working with a fire. You want to have a working fire suppression system. Fire extinguishers, you want to make sure you have an insurance policy covering the building and contents. I would even suggest as a line item for preparing against a fire, make sure your backups are working. Make sure you're able to restore from backup. Make sure you've got offsite backup, because if you have a fire, that's going to hit your on-site backup. Basically, if the whole building burns down, your on-site backup is gone. So you want to make sure you have off-site backups. You could go for a second working location. You could go for redundant equipment. That's going to be expensive. That's going to be a factor of how much budget do you have to be able to prevent and prepare for this type of disaster. And then also you would have in your plan, what is your response to this event occurring? So in this case, you're going to file an insurance claim. I mean, you're going to have a whole forensic study to see, is this arson? Was this bad electrical? The insurance company is going to want to know, if someone is hurt, well, someone's going to be liable for this. So there's, that becomes a whole mess. You might have a secondary working site. You might have to get new equipment. You might have to restore from offsite backup. This should all be in, having a response should be written down in your plan. And the reason is because when something like this occurs, you don't want to have to sit there and think, what should you do? If it's all written down, it's right there, and you've got a step-by-step instructions as to how you're going to respond to the situation. And this is not a thought experiment. This is something that does happen. I went to the news and just basically said, show me a fire in Bristol. Apparently this happened back in May of 2017. You've got a house fire. This does happen. This is not theoretical. This does happen. Example 2, we've got office flooding due to rain. You've got some equipment damage. This happened to one of my clients. They are in a location where there's a stream in their backyard. I guess it's not really a yard, but there's a stream within 100 feet of the building, and they're supposedly within a 100-year floodplain. Well, it just so happens that 100-year flood occurred and it had decent impact. The reason it didn't have more impact is because the server was on the second floor. If the server had been on the first floor, the impact probably would have been high because that would have shut down everything. However, in this case, only some of the staff were affected because only some of the computers were on the first floor and only some of the computers were affected. And the impact was medium because we only had to replace some of the equipment. We didn't have to replace everything. It did cause problems because now you've got water damage within the building and people shouldn't be in there, and they needed to do mold remediation and water damage remediation and everything else that goes along with getting a flood in your office. But that's still, it still could have been a whole lot worse. In their particular case, the water came in only up to about 3 or 4 inches on the first floor. And so because computers were directly on the floor, they have 1, 2, 3, 4. They had 5 computers on the floor, and 4 of them were destroyed because one of them was up off the ground. So the one computer that was up off the ground was fine, and the other 4 had to be replaced because the water damage just wrecked them. And of course, everything on the second floor, because they have a 2-story building, everything on the second floor was fine. So there was no issues, no problems. So in this particular case, you'd want in your preparations that you're going to keep equipment off the ground, which I highly recommend. You're going to want to keep it on desks. You want to locate servers and key equipment on the second floor, basically high off the ground. Maybe it's up on a shelf, maybe it's up on a table. And you're going to want to have some sort of physical assessment for drainage, maybe have an inspector come out. We did have one client in their office. It got rain, and the office itself became basically drainage because the rest of the drainage wasn't good. So the water should have gone around the office. Instead, it went right through the office because their office was the drain. And so they had to spend money basically on landscaping to redirect all the dirt and move things around so that the drainage was no longer their office. That was something that could have been better prepared, basically. But I don't know that they knew that at the time until they learned it the hard way. So those are some preparations that can be done. And of course, your response, you're going to file an insurance claim, presumably. You could have a secondary work site, you get new equipment, restore from offsite backup. You're probably going to need a mold remediation plan. Now notice both fire and flood, they are not direct IT issues. However, there are significant IT impact when you have damaged equipment, when you can no longer work, if your server is burned down or wet. So this is why I encourage thinking beyond just IT, but also figuring out how these particular problems play into, how these other disasters play into and affect your IT. And that's why we get involved and discuss this with clients. This is why I have it in our own DR plan. So you've got, there's a nice pretty picture of all that water at the Speedway. I thought I had pictures of where the water came up to from when my client flooded, but I couldn't find it. So they're there somewhere. So yeah, that's obviously not great. That's a lot of water. And we've had that happen on occasion. I would, from what I can tell, something like around here, depending where you are, flooding is going to be more of a probability than fire. I know, for example, in our backyard, we've got spots where when it rains really heavily, it's probably happened 3 or 4 times in the past 6 years that we've lived here. The water comes up pretty high in our backyard because just because of how the backyard is sloped. So I would personally think that flooding would be a higher chance of happening than fire, but both can have a pretty significant impact and reach depending on the extent of the issue. One more example. This is timely because this just happened yesterday at one of our clients. Employee opens a malicious email attachment. It's painful. It happens. And this is where you can never be sure how this is going to go. This could be a low reach, low impact, which is what happened to our client from yesterday. Only that computer was affected. Nothing else was impacted. We caught and quarantined it. It was kept within that computer. The virus did not spread anywhere else on the network. The server was perfectly fine. Everything was good to go, except for his computer. So, In that case, that was a low reach, low impact. On the other hand, we've had clients that they click on the attachment and now all of a sudden no one can access any files on the server because ransomware has attacked the whole server and everything shared is gone. And now all your files are gone and your data is gone and everyone is affected because everything was on the server. So that's why I have depends. It just, you never know until you get into that situation. So preparations, you really need good antivirus software, spam filtering to help keep that from getting to the person in the first place. Good backups. I can't overemphasize how good backups are critical to ransomware. That's actually why they were able to recover on the pipeline so quickly, is because they caught it early and they had backups that they could recover from. Then also you'd want your response. You want to notify IT as soon as someone catches it, which is what our client did. You want to run immediate scans of the computer. You might even physically disconnect the computer from the network. That's what we did. What happened was we were running scans and we were getting alerts every 5 seconds that the computer was trying to attack something else. So I just told the end user, please disconnect your computer from the network. Just pull out the network cable because we do not want this thing on the network while we're trying to clean it up. You want to check servers and other computers for infection. So there's this whole response that you're going to want to have depending on the virus, depending on the extent, depending on the damage. So these are, I just pulled a random ransomware message. I've seen this exact one, not necessarily, I've had a client get this exact message. They look differently nowadays. They tend to just have a text file that's all over the hard drive instead of this cute little screen. And they're asking for the Bitcoins, and they said, hey, we've encrypted your files for you because we're nice. Send us money and we'll unencrypt them for you. So it's bad if you get this, and hopefully you have good backups. And part of the preparation is to know that you have good backups before you need them. So let's talk about budgeting. So all these preparations, because as you know, this is a light list of different disasters that you could be addressing in your DR plan. And just even with this light list, you'll see that there's a lot of items that could go on here. And you could be spending hours and hours just coming up with lists of disaster recovery and business continuity. And that's the point, because there's a lot of things that you could be prepared for. But everything that you could potentially be prepared for needs to be measured with how much do you want to spend on that preparation. For example, if you're deeply concerned about a fire and you go through the whole process of a second site with matching servers and matching equipment, if a fire or flood occurs that wipes out your main office, it's very quick to get back up and running. But now you've spent all that money buying a second office and buying matching copies of all that equipment. So like I said before, unless you're a big company, that's going to be an expensive proposition and probably out of reach for many of the people that we interact with here. So, thinking through budgeting, if the internet is something that must not go down, you could order a different connection from another provider, if possible. That's not always the case. And this is not a particularly expensive option. If you're spending $100 for one internet circuit a month, then you're looking at $200 for a second internet circuit, basically. So you're paying $200 a month or so. And now you've got two different connections from two different companies, and you've just decreased your chances of your internet going down. And there are places that we deal with where the internet going down is a critical problem and needs to be fixed right away. If you have server failure, and if part of your DR plan is that you want to say we cannot tolerate server failure, you could be using a reliable cloud host or buy multiple servers. We've done it both ways for clients. This is more expensive than just buying an internet connection. It depends on the equipment, depends on how many servers you want redundant, depends on how big those servers have to be. It depends on how much you're spending on, say, AWS or Azure hosting, which are two of the big cloud hosting companies right now. And it depends on, are you replicating an entire data center? Do you have 100 servers that you need to buy second copies of? Or do you have just one or two servers? And that's considerably less expensive. And then if having staff work from one location is mission critical, and I would say a lot of companies thought that before COVID, then arranging for a second work site entirely, then this is also quite expensive. And I know that there are companies I've not seen them around here, but I know there are companies that offer services such that if your building goes down, you contract with them and they essentially send out a mobile home or something to that effect, or a freight container, like a shipping freight container that's set up with power and air and internet. And now you've suddenly got a space for 10, 15, 20 people to just plug up laptops and they're working. That's obviously not cheap. That's an expensive service to contract with, but they do exist. Maybe not around here. I've seen them in other parts of the country. And so that could be a response and part of your plan if you've decided that you absolutely have to have people working. Now, I will say this, the one upside to COVID, if you can think of it that way, is that remote working is a normalized thing. Prior to that, it was basically unheard of, and people would, it was the exception rather than the rule. And now it's very normalized and acceptable. And I've heard a lot of people talking about how they want to maintain working remotely even when everything is back to more normal. So communication. So communication is incredibly important, especially once you have your plan written. You now have to tell that to your employees. It's no good if it's locked up in your head. It's no good if you were the only one that knows about your disaster recovery plan. So make sure that you are able to communicate to your employees, which means have it written down. Once again, if it's not written down, it doesn't exist. You don't have a plan. Have it accessible, meaning if it's written down, you don't want it locked in a safe that you're the only person that has a key, and you want it clear and concise. You could spend 3 weeks writing up a 400-page disaster recovery plan, and I can guarantee you no one's going to read it. You don't want a doctoral thesis. You want something that addresses these issues. You want it to be quick. You want it to be clear. You want it to be concise. You want people to know how to respond when they have these different issues, and you don't want to belabor the point. Large organizations have been known to run recovery simulations or outage drills. Basically, they say, we're going to take your backups and you have to restore. And we're going to pretend like this server has gone down. What do you do? And I see that more from an IT side, where the IT side is planning these outages, but you could also do that if you've got a fire drill or a terrorist drill, or, take your pick. You also want to have employees potentially sign something stating that they've read and understood the DRBC company policy. This is for liability. This puts the burden back on them to make sure that they know and agree that this is how they're going to operate in case of an emergency. That doesn't mean they will, but it does shift the liability to them. They're responsible for that information, and you've communicated to them. Okay, so let's talk about backups. So working IT backups are absolutely essential for DR. As you can see, everything that I mentioned, even if it's not IT disaster, affects IT and will have a significant impact on your operations. If your computers go down, chances are you're going to have a very difficult time doing work. So you want to make sure that you've got your on-site backups as they recover faster, but they are susceptible to your local outages. That means if the place burns down, if there's flooding, you could potentially lose your on-site backups. So building instruction, those are items that will traditionally wipe out your backups. You could have physical device failure of your backup target. Offsite backups recover slower because you're downloading from the internet, but it's basically an insurance policy. That's how they function. And then all backups should be monitored and checked regularly. This is pretty hard to do if you're a small company, especially if you don't have the resources to check this, or maybe the know-how. If you're a business owner and you're running around doing your thing, I guarantee you don't have time to sit there and monitor your backups. Once again, that's a service that we typically do for our clients, and we help them in that way. So let's talk about on-site backups, and we're getting close to time. So backups depend on data size and the systems in use. For the smallest of operations, you can get away with an external USB hard drive in Windows backup. They're frequently good enough. If you're a big organization, it's not going to be good. But for smaller operations, if you've got 1 or 2 servers, for example, this is a great option. It's inexpensive. It works. We've done plenty of recoveries from Windows backup, and it works pretty well. The issue is you don't get reporting. You have to manually check it. So nothing like needing to restore a file, only discover that your backup stopped working 6 months ago and no one noticed. You also have a single server. Each server must be individually backed up. This way you don't have a central place to check everything to see how it's going. And if you can budget for a SAN or NAS, those are just more expensive options for backups. This allows for larger storage and allows you to centralize your on-site backups. Offsite backups, you've got multiple vendors offering offsite backups. There's any number of vendors. They all cost different amounts. We, of course, have our favorites, but I'm not here to shill for them. So ask me if you, I'm happy to talk about what we use and why, but I'm not gonna pitch any particular vendor. You want to check for vendor reliability and restore testing. I will say this, the one time I had to restore from Carbonite, it failed. It was a total failure in restore. It worked great for backing it up, but if you can't restore, your backups are useless. So I will say don't use Carbonite. How long did it take to download your files? So if you have hundreds of gigs of data, it could take all day to download your files. One time with one client, they got ransomware and the on-site backups were messed up as a result of the ransomware. So we had to restore from off-site backup, and it took about 12 hours to download their data. That's just how long it took. It wasn't as much a function of the off-site backup host as it was that's how much data they had to download. So that needs to factor into your recovery time as to how long it's going to take to download. Does the vendor provide private encryption? Can anyone access your data? By that, I mean, certain vendors will give you the opportunity to essentially have a private encryption, and you have to have a key in order to access the data. This secures your offsite backup, and I highly recommend setting that in place. And then you get notifications. Our vendors do, or the people that we use for offsite backup, you get notifications, you have a private encryption. This basically makes it easier to track and monitor your backups and know that something's happening, and know that if there's a failure, or even worse, you don't get an alert. That's, not getting an alert is even worse than getting a failure. So since we're getting close on time, I'm just going to wrap it up here. By way of reminder, write down your plan. No written plan means no plan. You want to factor in reach, impact. I didn't talk about likelihood, at least on the slides, but it's certainly important. And preparation costs into prevention planning. So know your budget. What are the chances of this event occurring? And then make sure that you're addressing categories of every combination for reach and impact. You want to make sure your staff know the plans, because once again, if you're the only one who knows the plans, that's a problem for you. And then test your backups in case of technical failure, because every single one of these involved recovery from backup. Well, almost every. Maybe a low impact, low reach might not. But just about any sort of disaster, you've got a pretty good chance of needing to restore from backup. And so you want to test your backups before you actually need to use them. So I am ready if anyone's got any questions or comments.
Thank you, Jonathan. That's such an important topic. I know I was on the COOP planning team here at the Higher Ed Center, and there's so much that goes into the planning of, especially with all the different institutions in here, and trying to figure out where we would go and what we would do if something like that happened here. So anyone that has questions, if you will put those in the Q&A at the bottom or in the chat, either one.
So Jonathan, I've got a question for you. I was intrigued by your San Francisco story about the ex-employee changing all the passwords. Other than they're having to hire outside folks to come in to fix that, did they have any precedent, or they could go after that employee?
He went to jail.
Sue them for those expenses?
He went to jail and was fined.
Okay.
Yeah. Like it was this huge, it took several years to work through the court systems, and it was a huge fiasco.
Yeah, I'm just curious who got the last word. Evidently the court system did.
The court system, yeah. You don't mess with the court system.
Is the issue you see the most somebody who, gets a ransomware?
Yeah, viruses, out of everything, in terms of all the things that I mentioned, the highest likelihood that we see are, say, hard drive failures and viruses. I mean, hard drives, they're less mechanical devices these days, but they're still parts. They still have a lifespan. They still go out. They're still manufacturer defects. And so we deal with hard drive failures all the time. Thankfully, viruses are less of an issue these days. I would say it was much worse 10, 15 years ago, partly because people were less educated. Now it's a lot. I would say there's better general knowledge not to click on attachments. There's better general knowledge not to click on this pop-up when you're on a website and now all of a sudden your computer's blaring at you saying, please call this number for Microsoft support. It happens, but there's less people that are in our anecdotal experience, there's less people that are actually doing that. Now, of course, it still happens. And the reason we know it happens is because we keep seeing those pop-ups. If it didn't happen, the scammers wouldn't do it. They keep doing it because it's effective.
Exactly.
Jonathan, do companies get insurance for
Yes.
disaster
Yes.
situations?
Yeah, and that's going to depend on which company you're using. Part of the reason why I like Andrew, who did the presentation several
April
months
the
ago,
1st.
Yes, he is. He'll take in a lot of these things into consideration when he's writing business plans. So, or business insurance. So sometimes it'll fall under your general liability. Sometimes you can get, for example, a separate data breach policy or a separate rider that handles data breach. That's going to be a very specific type of disaster, but it's still a major disaster nonetheless because of, once again, how frequently it occurs. So that's going to be something that you as the business owner are going to be responsible for knowing in terms of what kind of fire insurance do you have? What kind of flood insurance do you have? Do you have riot insurance? I wouldn't have thought to ask that 10 years ago.
It's true. Mandy and Margie, this question's for you all. Is this something that you all have questions about a lot from your small businesses or somebody who's interested in starting a business?
I really don't have a lot of questions about that, but I have a question for Jonathan.
Go for it.
This week, I received a call from Amazon saying that my account had been compromised.
Yep.
And that a large purchase had been made, and
Yep.
that if I wanted to pursue it, that I needed to press 1, and they had several
Yep.
options. So yes, I have an Amazon account. So I thought, I don't think I've ordered anything.
Yep.
So what I did is I just hung up.
Yep.
And then I went and I checked my Amazon account. I checked my credit card. I checked my husband's credit card, to make sure that there hadn't been any charges.
Yep.
But is there any recourse when you get that kind of, it's just so
Nope.
frustrating. And it scares me for older people because, I almost bought into it.
Yep.
But it's like, what can you do other than just not respond?
There's very little, honestly, because of where the criminals are coming from. There's a guy named Mark Rober who has an absolutely fantastic YouTube channel. And one of his recent videos was him going behind the scenes on some of these scammer groups. And it's like about a 25-minute video. If you watch that, you'll see why it's so difficult to catch these people, because we're talking international crime at that point. So they're using spoofed phone numbers. That's not a legitimate phone number. I've actually had my number be spoofed, and I'll get random text messages from people saying, "Why are you calling me?" I'm like, "Sorry, that wasn't me. that was not me." So they will go out of their way to hide their tracks, and they're asking for Bitcoins or Ethereum or cash because they also don't want that to be traceable in the financial markets. That's why they're not asking for your credit card necessarily. Some of them do, but
Okay,
it's much easier to charge back a credit card.
What was the second term you used? Bitcoins or?
Oh, Ethereum. It's just one of the more popular cryptos. There's hundreds.
I wasn't familiar with it.
ETH is one of the bigger ones at this point, besides Bitcoin.
Okay.
Courtney, I was going to say that I think I'm kind of similar to Margie. I think it's one of these things that business owners don't necessarily think about that they need to think about.
To see it. We
right?
hardly ever see it, let alone have it
right.
written down.
So, or until there's a problem.
Yep.
It's always kind of like, oh, I have a problem now. I'm going to be trying to look at it.
Yep.
And so that comes on technical advisors for us to hopefully make sure that business owners are looking at those things. And similar to Marty and me, I think, scams in even the not just telephones and not through mail. And scams can be actually even very as simple as they get an email from what is a legitimate company,
yep.
but it's a scare tactic that they're not following a guideline such as labor posters. And they have to purchase these labor posters from this particular company, and it's going to be $350. Yep. And that's not necessarily a true statement. Yes, you have to display labor posters, but you don't have to have the laminated big copy. And so it's not just the ransomware link, I think. It's also when you're, a disaster recovery. That was a very simple example, but I mean, to the extent Jonathan created some examples that are, or provided examples that show the extent of having that recovery.
If I created them, I'd have more money, apparently.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like scare tactics are what it comes down to. And so just, I hate to use the word be wary, but business owners have to be wary just as much with their business as they are their personal credit.
And the other challenging part is that they're constantly changing their tactics. Like, so for example, one of my clients provides me with an email address for them, so I can, because it's a big enough client that they provide me with an email address on their platform, because that's how much email I send them. And it helps me because I can separate out email just for them. So what happened is I got an email from a very high ranking officer in the organization asking me to go buy some gift cards for clients, or it's not for clients, for employees. I was like, that's a little bit strange, but I did not get the notice that it was an external email, because Outlook warns me this is an external contact when I'm emailing somebody outside of the organization. I didn't get that notice. I was like, okay, but I also didn't look at the email address because I didn't get that notice. And so we had some back and forth, and he got to the point where he said, okay, please buy these gift cards and send me the numbers. And I was like, okay, hang on. This is not going in the direction that it should be going, or I should say this has got scam written all over it. So at that point I forwarded it to their chief counsel, and he goes, yeah, this is a scam. And that's when, it wasn't until then that I looked at the email to see that it was outside, that it was a faked Gmail. And once again, I was dependent too much on technology because I was used to Outlook telling me this is an outside contact, and it didn't do it. And I just took it for granted.
We run into that, Jonathan, all the time through the college. Like yesterday, multiple people's accounts were sending out, how are you today? Are you on campus?
Yep.
Or are you on campus today?
Yep.
And I got one from Shannon, my boss, and I looked at the email address, and it was exactly her email, except it had a period in between, like yep. SRBAQ period, Virginia period, .edu. And so otherwise I would have just responded, but I knew she knew I was off. So I was like, that's odd. Why would she send me that? But it happened to multiple people on campus yesterday. We have a question from Becky Oquin also. She said, is there anything to consider with company cell phones and security?
Well, so it just so happens that the cell phone is probably one of the primary ways that two-factor authentication is occurring. So if you've ever gotten your text messages to confirm your password, or I've got authenticator applications that run sort of like the old RSA key tokens, with the revolving numbers every 10, 15 seconds, whatever. So your cell phone has turned into essentially a security device at this point. So the loss of a cell phone can actually be very high impact, because now you've given out your two-factor authentication token. Even if they don't know your passwords, they can do password resets. And guess what? That's going to your cell phone. And your text message to confirm is going to your cell phone. So that's why we highly recommend passwords. And I don't even like fingerprint readers, partly because you can be compelled to give your fingerprint, but you cannot be compelled to give a password. That's how you get arrested. They can force you to give your password, your fingerprint. You get arrested, they cannot force you to give your password. Once again, I'm not an attorney. Don't hold me to that. That varies by state, varies by court system. But there have been, all the way up to the Supreme Court, issues over turning over passwords, being compelled to give your password versus a fingerprint. That being said, if someone's breaking into your phone, it's a little bit easier to cut off your finger than it is to extract your passwords.
I'll go back to Courtney's situation. We're actually tested by the college, and so I have to be really careful.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. Do you guys have a written disaster recovery plan for your organizations?
We do.
Excellent. Yeah, it's already ahead of probably 95% of the people that we encounter.
And because of the way the higher ed center is actually set up, it involves multiple groups. So we have a whole
Excellent.
team.
Excellent. That's great. And see, you guys are a big organization, so you have the resources to have people on that full time, or at least as part of their core job requirement.
Yeah, once we establish it, they just go back and review it, I think, twice a year.
Yep. That's awesome. That's the way it should be.
Let's see. We have one more that just came in. Lydia said, thanks for this. Looking forward to listening to the recording. Have a great topic.
Excellent.
Had a delay.
Excellent.
And I don't see any other questions. Anybody else have any questions for Jonathan?
I just want to say thanks again, Jonathan. I know this takes time out of your busy schedule to present this session and also plan for it. So I appreciate it. And I know my partners feel the same way. And I highly recommend folks to and I'll be sending out Jonathan's slides later today and a link where we'll upload the session. But if this can help someone else, I think that's what we're doing this for. I know what's what we're doing it for, is we're providing content to help other businesses and nonprofits in Virginia. And just want to do a plug that our next session, Refocus and Rebuild, will be managing hardware and software assets. That includes tracking warranties, lifecycle management, and license key purchase versus used. And Jonathan will be leading that. Now, the warranties, I hope you're not going to be talking about my car warranty, because I get those calls all the time. But it's all things that we have to decide. Do I want to do an extended warranty on this device? What's the life cycle of it? So I think it's pertinent for all businesses and nonprofits, especially if you're looking at, capital improvements in the future for your organization. So that's all I have. Thanks again, and I hope to see you in 2 weeks, and I hope everybody does well.
Excellent.
Have a good day.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
See you.
Bye-bye.